What's going on, y'all? Just Haley here, and I am back again with another video. Now today's video is going to be for Gara, who just got her stat stick removal rework, part of the collection of frames that got that. And while Atlas and Khora are eating pretty good, Gara did get hit pretty hard with a relatively sizable nerf. With the build here that you guys see on screen, I actually have 2 free shards available to use. I didn't commit to that just yet, because I didn't want to do anything with her just until she did have her change, just so I knew what I wanted to do. As you can see, I'm pulling 520,000 damage on a very comfortable, very easy build for Gara. It's very simple. You could run Matarai and bump this up to 1.4 million, but it made it less easy, less simple, and I really did want the most brainless build possible. But this build here did eat a pretty big nerf with the changes. The loss of stat sticks, the loss of Incarnin, the loss of all of those damage sources, as well as having her damage from her 1 did nerf the absorb that you'll have by about 35%.
What?
Now, like I said, there was a Matarai build that you could use, that's what this is, but there are ways to mitigate this aside from just using Matarai, which again, I just don't think is very consistent. I don't think it's very good. This is again pre-changes, so I am using the stat stick, the router, the build combo, stuff like that. This will not be how you play her anymore. You don't need to do all of that, but what you will be doing is kind of just the same thing, but a little bit tweaked. And that's because you do really rely on making up for that loss of damage by more strength. The main thing she scaled off previously, if you were trying to get large numbers in your absorption for her 2, Splinter Storm, was just really, really high raw damage. And that's the main thing she lost. She made up for it with some crit chance, some status chance, but overall that's not a big deal for her. What really mattered was the raw damage. And even with the combo, even with everything else, and you can see just how long it takes to build that in the very beginning, it's going to slow down your ramp up just a little bit, and it is going to hurt how much you can absorb.
But you can't do this to me.
I started this company.
Now you might be thinking that overall a, 448,000 seems good. That's only 80,000 less. How is this that big of a nerf? Well, this is actually with 41% more strength. I'm running 2 shards, and I also swapped my Umbral Intensify into a Transient Fortitude, so I'm also losing duration, which is something Gara really likes because it makes her overall kit feel a little bit better for utility. So that is a pretty big nerf if we're really thinking about it, but we can get a lot of that back if we just make a couple sacrifices, and we can hopefully turn things around for our glass goddess.
You know how much I sacrificed?
And that's what we're going to be focusing on today, is trying to turn things around for Gara to really capitalize on her. You can see one of the things I'm demonstrating here is actually kind of the jank of her kit. Gara does have some really annoying features. Her 4 glasses enemies, if enemies are CC'd while they're glassed, they'll sit on the ground for longer. She actually can't recast on them, and even if you stand over top of them with the Splinter Storm going, it's gonna feel pretty bad. So the main thing that we want to be able to do is to one-shot enemies, because if we can't, there is always the risk of actually taking our ability to damage them away. That's always going to feel bad for her, and it is going to be one of the biggest reasons why I personally don't like all of these builds that are coming up with using melee influence or afflictions for her 1, because rather than embracing Gara's kit, you're embracing the jank of Gara's kit to try to make her essentially worse Khora or worse Atlas. Both of them, like I said, are eating really good in different ways after this buff, so it is a really interesting way to approach things, but hopefully you guys can follow with me on this, and I can show you why this is still a very strong kit, and it still works really well. Now, just as a caveat for the gameplay, I did shift the build a little bit from what this was, mostly because of kind of how my experience went during this. I didn't value Prime Sure-Footed on her probably as much as I should have because of the sacrifices we made, but there's going to be some difference in how you can run this, and you can also keep things going with just the 448,000 and keep things very comfortable as an alternate build as well. So I'm going to give you guys a bunch of different variable builds here. Hopefully you'll find one that you guys enjoy. Again, if you guys do, please remember, like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. I'll hold your hand as we get through these Gara changes, and hopefully you guys can learn to like her or find out that you like her as much as I do. Now, one of the things I mentioned is that her 1 could be used as a melee influence weapon. A lot of people are doing that, but keep in mind, again, you don't have a Y-axis movement on that. If you're going to go for the slash, that doesn't feel great. It's also only going to be viable against enemies that are in groups. If they're not in groups, you're going to notice a huge damage loss, and that's going to feel really bad. One of the ways that we can help mitigate some of her lost damage is by utilizing her augment. The Splinter Storm, when you cast it on an enemy, actually gives you a rather decent damage buff to the enemy. They get damage vulnerability. It's pretty strong, 1.3 times, and when you're adding in a ton of strength like we are, that goes really crazy. The longer you hold her for, the bigger the AoE for that ability when it comes off with the augment, her Shattered Storm. It's very, very strong for what we're doing here, and it is going to allow you to get back some of that nuke potential that she used to have on AoEs. Keep in mind that both her Shattered Lash as well as her 4 will go through walls, so that is something that you might want to keep considering when you are casting. Also, you can get a little bit more value for it if you cast it while you're near one of those ledges, so you can make sure that it goes over those and you can get more enemies locked down with her CC. It's pretty good. The other thing with her 4 is that her 4 is also, if it glasses an enemy, a damage multiplier. These multiplicative damage multipliers are going to work really well for giving her back some of her damage, especially with adding more strength to the kit. The other way you can do that is something like a Grimoire with the 60% buff of strength there. I do use that a little bit in the gameplay here, just so you guys know. That is a really nice way to maximize her kit just a little bit, getting you up to potentially all the way up to 145% more strength than what I was running, or if I'd done full shard investment, about 115% more strength investment in this build. Now the main pieces of this build are going to be Blind Rage, Equilibrium, Stretch, Rolling Guard, Prime Continuity, and Prime Flow. The rest of this is kind of optional. You are also going to want to run Arcane Aegis as well as Arcane Energize. One of the biggest issues with Gara is her tendency to burn through energy like none other. It is really, really harsh sometimes. Now keep in mind, you can mitigate this through other sources. Nourish is going to be great, but the thing you'll lose with Nourish if you're not using Eclipse is you'll lose the multiplicative damage buff on her Shattered Lash, which means you'll be pulling way less back, and that's really, really harsh. I couldn't consider it. I didn't want to do it, but if you were okay with doing less damage and absorbing less damage, it's an option. The main thing here is Power Drift isn't great here because we're also sacrificing Adaptation, which I used to use in the build. Sacrificing Adaptation and Prime Sure-Footed really made Gara vulnerable to getting knocked down and just getting one shot. That was pretty rough. Honestly, I would lose one or the other, and that's why this isn't the final version of the build that I decided on, but it is very solid. It'll get you through a lot of Steel Path very, very easily without much issue. Free for Spite, make sure you're triggering your Aegis. You've got Rolling Guard to block off any statuses. You've got her 4, which is an iframe while you're casting it, which is also very good. All of that works really well. Shattered Storm is going to make sure you're spreading all that damage vulnerability, so all of that feels very, very solid. But overall, it's a pretty big sacrifice on strength, because not only are you sacrificing strength in the form of Shattered Storm, but you're also sacrificing strength in the form of something like Growing Power if you want to do that. It can be a little bit harsh, but you are getting some strength back in Power Drift to help make up for that. Really up to you. This was a solid build, and this is the one that's in the gameplay. That's why I'm starting with it, but it's not my preferred build. Now another example of not my preferred build would be this one. While this is an exceptional build and will help you ramp very quickly, effectively this one without a book is going to give you about a 4.8% buff from what she had before, for the sacrifice of a little bit of duration and the sacrifice of Adaptation, as well as the additional 2 power strength shards that she's running. Overall, this ends up being in a pretty similar place, but you do lose that Adaptation. Now, for most frames, I actually don't really care for Adaptation, but because Gara with her Splinter Storm tends to run at enemies pretty consistently, it is nice to be able to just ignore the fodder. All the basic enemies, the Impact, Puncture, Slash, will stack up very quickly, and you'll notice yourself being way less tankier without it. So overall, this ends up not being, again, my preferred build. I just think you're kind of leaning a little too heavy in the strength. While you will stack up things faster, if you run a Grimoire, you can actually get about 690,000 damage pulled back instantaneously whenever you stack that up first. Very, very strong with this build. You're going to feel really, really comfy with that for your ramp up. Again, keep in mind the ramp up period is when Gara is weakest. But overall, you're sacrificing a little bit too much survivability, so if you ever go down, you're going to feel pretty bad there. Personally, not a big fan, but that is going to be up to you. That's why I'm including this one as the high strength variant. with Prime Sure-Footed, because again, we're not running Adaptation. If you were even more comfortable not running Prime Sure-Footed, or you just don't have it, Power Drift here would be even more strength, therefore taking you even further. Now, I know a lot of people don't like Prime Sure-Footed, but what you're about to see here is actually a reason why I like Prime Sure-Footed on her. I try to use my 1, accidentally hold it, then I can't cast down the stairs, which then means I get hit by enough things to knock me down, triggering me to go into operator mode where I have to use the vulnerability from some of the enemies here to come back up. It's definitely a frustrating piece if you don't have Prime Sure-Footed. I'm really used to it, so I know that's definitely a skill issue in part, but I do think it's just a very strong mod if you're looking for a way to survive, especially if we're going to be removing Adaptation. That's why for the power strength build, I run the Prime Sure-Footed. If you want to run a very comfortable build, again, I recommend Prime Sure-Footed, and that does bring us into what is actually my preferred and favorite build for Gara. So my favorite build for Gara does use both Prime Sure-Footed and Adaptation. We're also going to keep this Transient Fortitude because while I do really like duration on Gara, she wants that power strength enough that I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of duration to get me 11% more power strength. That's going to feel really good. Unfortunately, we still can't change our arcanes here. We really need the energy. We really like Aegis, both to make ourselves invulnerable and not to have to worry about our energy during missions. Equilibrium is really important here too. And overall, what this ends up doing for us is it puts us into a place where we are relatively tanky and still stacking up about 450,000 damage every hit. Now this is less than what it used to be, and that definitely is a little bit of a disappointment. Overall, you're getting about a 14% nerf here, so again, that kind of sucks, but it is going to be a comfortable build, and no augment does mean that you aren't ramping that as hard with the AoE. If you're running with a squad, you could certainly drop Adaptation for the augment. That is, personally, the main change that I would make. If I was going to make any change to this build right now, Adaptation could come off for the augment so that Shattered Storm could come in, especially if I'm running with teammates, because then that's a ton of utility that you're giving the team. It's going to feel really good. Now for the Shattered Lash, I know a lot of people are running things like Melee Influence, some people are running Afflictions, but for the Absorb, you want as much raw damage back as possible. Exposure is really the only option. You can't crit the wall, you can't status the wall, so you can just run big damage numbers. I run body count as well, just to help boost things up, and then because I personally break with both the projectile as well as the slash, I run Magnetic Rush. Instead of that, if you wanted to, you could do your Buzzkill or something to increase the slash damage like that, and that's going to give you a better slash break. It is losing about 60% of the damage there for the comfort of being able to break with either. Now, since again I use both, I went with Magnetic Rush. The other benefit there is that if you do proc that Magnetic on something like a Xmas unit, it's going to be a little bit more damage because it is into that Overguard. That's going to feel really good. So depending on which of these builds you follow, you're going somewhere between a 37% nerf, which is what she got hit by, going from 520,000 down to 330 before I made any changes, to if you just add in the shards and then make the swap of Umbral Intensify to Transient Fortitude, really simple, it's about a 14% nerf. And then if you do add in a little bit more, maybe you swap off the Adaptation for more strength, you're getting a 4.8% buff. That's not factoring in the extra strength you can get from books, which is going to take you all the way up to a 33% buff in damage absorbed. Now keep in mind that the damage absorbed is going to help her a lot. The ability to apply vulnerability to things like Acolytes is also going to help a ton, which is going to feel really good. But she also does lack a lot of that freedom to be a real weapons platform with all that vulnerability, because she's constantly having to cast, and she constantly needs that energy re-up to continue to cast, to continue to be Gara, essentially, in the mission. Now, overall, this update for her really did force her closer to using her 1 a lot, but again, if you want to do that, it's just way better, way more efficient, and way more effective to do it with Khora or Atlas. Khora can do it with Melee Influence and just do it better. She can direct her whip really easily, and she can spam that into enemies. She also doesn't care about things like nullifiers. Atlas can do it by just spamming the hell out of his 1, doing tons of damage with high crit in AoE. It's really, really strong, and again, he doesn't care about walking into a nullifier. Meanwhile, Gara does care about that. Gara also cares about things like stairs or Y-axis, things like those are going to make her miss her slash, so you do get forced into using that projectile. But you can even see when enemies are in a line, you can do a ton of damage with your projectile. You can do a ton of damage with your slash. It's a lot of one-shots here without even having to prime. And then when you do start priming, when you do start hitting them with not just the Splinter Storm, but things like the glassing, all of that works really well to make it do a ton of damage. We're doing millions of damage in a massive AoE, about 22 meters, 23 meters at full range, which is very, very strong, and it does feel really good, but it does miss out on some of the old things that you could have had. By that I mean, right now at most, we're at about 690,000, 700,000 with these builds being able to ramp up. We would be pushing 950,000 or more if we still had our stat sticks. Now, I understand that we are going to lose some damage. I understand some people might not like the fact that I'm comparing this to the stat sticks, but it is just a base thing of they increase crit, they increase status, and they remove base damage, while also then removing the ability to add Rivens, the ability to have the Incarnates, which gave you 100 base damage, the ability to have the Incarnate Form, which gave you 100% more damage on top of that. All of that really does add up to a big nerf to her Absorb build, which used her entire kit. So I'm a little bit salty about the change, I will say, mostly because it does keep her roughly where she was anyway, with the same kind of idea. And even with this gameplay, I'm still kind of using 2 stat sticks, in that I brought the Miter, because the Miter is going to be able to use the Neutralizing Justice augment type thing for it, the weapon mod for it, which will instantly pop those nullifier bubbles, as you can see there. And that's really nice. It's going to be really convenient. It's going to help me stack up my damage a lot easier. The other thing that I'm going to be able to do is bring things like my Grimoire to make sure that I'm doing as much as I can to get pack that power strength. That's really going to help. I'm also running secondary dexterity on the Grimoire, which is going to be even more trying to kind of stat stick her up and use my weapons to make Gara a little bit better. Overall, we removed stat sticks, but we kind of kept them, and that's a bit frustrating. It's just, they're not called stat sticks now, and they work slightly differently, but it feels really similar. While I used to take the Rauda through, and I would go through and stack up my combo, now I have to take the Miter and make sure that I pop any of those bubbles. If I'm not doing anything that involves nullifiers, then of course I'm not doing relics, I'm not doing void missions, and I'm not doing Corpus, which is a huge limitation on the content that she'll feel comfortable doing. From there, you're talking about running the extra strength. It's going to feel really good. I do run some auger mods here as well in my Grimoire book. It just becomes a position of we shifted the stat stick from the melee and the primary to the primary and the secondary. Is that really worth it? Is that what we want? I don't know. I'm here to show you guys the build. I do really still like this. I still like Gara. Is this enough to break her into my top 5 because now she's not using a stat stick? I don't know, because she still kind of is, but I will say that I do really like Gara. She's a lot of fun, and these builds are really fun. I definitely recommend giving her a try. You can see that you're still going to one-shot Misery. He does not love company when that company is a blender. But overall, I do think we did leave a little bit on the table here. There's still a little bit of meat on the bone, and I would love to see just a small numbers change, or even just get rid of some of the jank in her kit, so that if you do have to build her for just her one and make worse Khora, it just doesn't feel bad for doing that by leaving enemies on the ground that you can't actually hit, because that's incredibly frustrating, again, as you can see here. Overall, that has been the build. I do hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys liked it. If you guys check it out, please let me know what you think. Let me know how you guys are navigating this. Let me know what you guys are thinking of the Echoes update. I've been Just Haley. You've been amazing. And remember that until next time, I love your faces. Bye, y'all.